Hello there, my name's Donnie of D3VFX, and this is my short tutorial series on how I created this environment here. This is going to be a series of 4 short videos with the goal of giving you as much important information as possible within the shortest amount of time so that you can spend more time creating. This video, I'm going to go over the use of Gaea and creating height maps. The next video in the series is going to be how to import these height maps into Unreal and Houdini. From there, I'm going to focus on the Unreal side and work on environment texturing and some foliage tips and tricks. And from there, I'm going to go into some rendering tips and tricks that I came across. Now, I do want to offer a short disclaimer before I get into all these videos. I do utilize a Gaea professional license in this video. I also use 3 paid plugins within Unreal, which is William Foucher's EasyFog, Ultra Dynamic Sky, and Brushify. However, with EasyFog and Brushify, you can follow tutorials to create your own landscape materials or fog cards. It was just sort of that classic game of time versus money, and I decided it'd be a lot easier for me to spend my time elsewhere rather than try to create some of these on my own. But that being said, let's get into the Gaea side of this tutorial. And this right here is the sort of pre-visualization of the height map that I created and brought into Unreal to create that environment that I was just showing. So to get into how I made this, I used a Badlands node here, transformed it, so I just flipped one of them to the other side, fractal terraced it a little bit to kind of get that more dramatic edge that I wanted. This was just an experimentation with the erosion and what those would look like. I ultimately decided not to go with these results, but I kept these erosion nodes here just in case I decided I wanted to reapproach this later. I then use a combine node to sort of create these sides here using this mask. From there, I combine with another mask, this other Badlands that I transformed to that side. This is sort of to give me that horseshoe shape and accomplish this. From there, I blur it a little bit so I can get rid of some of these sharper edges that I couldn't quite get rid of with erosion. So then when I do erode it, I get a lot cleaner edges here, and I sort of get the sharper decline that I was looking for. And then the micro erosion is really nice for adding in these sort of like tributaries of where you'd see water running off and collecting, and how it would erode the landscape. From there, I generated my normal map, and I used this primarily in Unreal. However, I will go over how to set this up for Houdini as well. But in Unreal, under this build tab here that you can see in the top right, you can select your resolution. If you're using a community license, you are going to be limited to 1025, I believe. That can lead to an issue where you sort of see banding in your landscape once you import that into Unreal. I'll address some ways that you can kind of get around that and still have a nice environment with a 1K map. It just may not quite look as good as it would if you actually exported a 4K map or 8K, etc. Those of you who are familiar with these resolution sizes, you may notice like, oh, it's 1009 and not 1024. Unreal Engine is a little bit different than other 3D softwares, at least that I have used, and it has a slightly different resolution for these maps. So if I go ahead and put down, I'm just going to hit tab here, and this is how you'll search for any node that you want. I should also mention this Unreal Output node, I believe, is also not available in the community version of Gaea. To get around that, you still can use a normal output with a normal, let me click on that, there we go, with a normal like 1024 resolution or 4K, etc. It's just, it might give you some weird edges along the outside here, which I'll demonstrate later and kind of show you what I'm talking about with that in the next video where I'm talking about importing these height maps to Unreal. Now, to actually mark any of these nodes for export so that you can actually get these maps outputted, if you right click, you can click mark for export. You can also press F3 like it shows right here. So in this case, my Unreal output is currently my only node actually marked for export. So when I hit build and I come in here, start build, this is the only node that I will be getting outputted. Now, I know I personally ran into a little bit of confusion when I was looking at how to export these maps, and I came across these height nodes. And I want to mention these briefly that these are great for maybe isolating a section of your height map. Like say, oh, I only want, this lower like valley-ish area and I want to ignore the tops of these. Like maybe you want to create a map for scattering rocks, or maybe you have some sort of like procedural texturing approach you want to take. That'll be a way to sort of generate some of these maps based off height, if that's something you want. Gaea also has the functionality to create rock maps, so it'll sort of naturally give you areas at the bottoms of cliff faces and stuff like that where rocks might have naturally fallen and collected over time. For the purposes of Unreal Engine, I did not utilize these maps because using the foliage tool in Unreal, I think, is a very good approach, and you can definitely art direct it pretty significantly if you want to take the time to do that. But in a program such as Houdini, that might be something that interests you a lot more, and it's pretty easy to do. You just tab a rock map. We'll throw that down right here. I'm going to connect this micro erosion to it because it is the final node that I have that's actually like affecting the quote-unquote geometry of this height map. And you can see all of these little spots are where it's saying these rocks might be collecting. And let's see, yeah, you can control your density, so more or less, etc. Maybe we want less coverage. You can invert it if you choose. But yeah, that's sort of the basis of the rock map. I also want to mention with these combines, actually, I did use these equations down here. And I used that to sort of, I think I used it on this one, actually. Yeah, I used the log function on this one. And what that really accomplished was, with my mask, even though I'm saying, only mask this area and combine it, I was sort of getting this way more flat result here. And using the log was able to increase the value by which it was combining, or at least that's how I understand it, and thus gave me more of my desired result, which I then, of course, blurred, eroded, etc. Now, to go back to this Unreal output for a moment, a limitation of Unreal when it comes to height maps and the quality of height maps is that it can only use up to a 16-bit PNG. It cannot utilize TIFFs, EXRs, or RAW, etc. So, if you're using an output node because you don't have this Unreal output, that's just one thing to keep in mind. The highest you can do is a 16-bit PNG for the use in Unreal. Again, I'm going to kind of show a way to get around that just a little bit with the landscape tools in Unreal. But that being said, let me go ahead and build this out so you can see what this map looks like. Alright, here we go. So here you can see some of the heights that I've exported previously. This Unreal output matches the Unreal output node's name, which you can also set in your build up here. So if you want to give it a custom name, you totally can. But this is what that map looks like. Here you can kind of see some of the banding in this map, which is sort of what I was mentioning with the limitations of the 16-bit PNG being the best quality we can export for use in Unreal. However, I have found Unreal generally handles it really well, but even if we have to use a map that's not quite the right size or a 1K map, etc., there are still ways that we can sort of get around it. It'll just take you more time. So again, like with the paid plugins and such that I mentioned, it's sort of just that question of time versus money. Do you have the time that you can spend on it, or would you rather just get a license, export a higher version, etc.? But before I end this tutorial and go into the next tutorial on importing these height maps, I do want to mention sat maps and coloring and such for your height maps here. You can export these color maps and utilize them within Unreal or Houdini. However, I have found generally they look great for the purposes of sort of like a previs of what you ultimately want this environment to look like, but retexturing it is necessary. unless you're going to use it as a sort of like distant mesh or like something like a mountain range in the background or like something like that. In which case, there are probably ways of you of optimizing this that you don't have huge mountains in the background that have a ton of geometry. But yeah, that being said, I do also want to give a couple tips and tricks on finding nodes and figuring out like what tools you have at your disposal. So if you are ready to go ahead and import these maps, then feel free to skip to the next video. But if you would like a little bit more information on just Gaea in general, then feel free to stick around. So over here, obviously, we've got some nodes listed down the sides. And some of these I have not experimented with, so that'll be a fun experiment later. But this is a great way to find some nodes that you can use between just the primitive type stuff or geo, like, oh, I want a crater. Boom, that's what crater looks like. But you also, of course, have the tab menu where you can be like, oh, mountain, let's see. Yeah, that's an erosion. Let's see. Let's plug this in to this combine just to see what it does. There you go. So that's kind of a fun way to find some nodes there. You also, in the top left, can change what the preview of your map here is. So in this case, like this is what it would look like if I exported it as a 1K map. So if I go ahead and just selected, let's just say 4K for the heck of it. Yeah, switch to 4K. And it's going to take a second to rebake these nodes, basically. So you have to kind of keep that in mind when you're doing this. It is not an efficient workflow to use while you're still building your height map. But if you get to a point that you're feeling pretty happy with the results and you want to get a more true idea of what this map will look like after building it, this is a great way to do that. You just make sure you select your final node, go ahead and switch it. You don't have to select the final node, but I just find it's easier that once it's done baking, I'll be able to see what I want to see, and I won't have to click on another node and then let it catch up with recompiling. But yeah, so we're going to give this just a moment there. Erosion nodes, micro erosion, anything that is sort of, I was going to use the word procedural, but procedural is not quite the right word. Any node that is sort of simulating something like erosion or water, etc., is going to take longer to rebake because it sort of has to resim for the entire area. But now you can see that difference in quality here. We have a lot more crisp lines, a lot more like subtle detail through these little peaks and valleys. You can see a lot more striation from the micro erosion down here, a whole bunch through here. And some of this will come through in Unreal, some of it will not. Houdini is definitely a software you can import these into that you'll see a lot more of these details depending upon how many polys you allow your height field to use. But, you know, still gives you a great idea of what this might look like. We're just going to kind of lose some of these more subtle variations in Unreal, which I'll show you in the next video. So I hope this was helpful. If you have any questions, please leave a comment below. I also have the documentation to my website where I sort of recounted my work through this project. So if you'd like to check that out, I also have the links to the other videos there as well as in the description of this video. And please let me know if you have any questions. Thank you so much.